Imagine a church bell drowning in smoke, mittens clutched to faces as a wooden sleigh coughs out ember-laced breath into the snow. You think Christmas is all chestnuts and cheesy carols, but in history, it often smelled like burnt wood and panic instead of cinnamon. In this video, we'll walk through 30 nightmare Christmas moments, 15 catastrophes that ruined the day, and 15 disturbing Christmases that showed how dark holiday traditions can get. Buckle up, the tinsel has teeth. On Christmas of 1871, a lightning-sparked blaze devoured entire blocks of wooden homes while families were at church or dinner, leaving chimneys like broken teeth jutting from blackened foundations. People remember stockings and roast meats, but in some towns, the holiday became a desperate scramble with sleighs overloaded like escape pods. The aftermath smelled of smoke and wet wool for months, and for many the tree never came down so much. Floods in winter are nasty because cold makes everything less forgiving. A swollen river in December turned many families' holiday into a soggy nightmare of ruined presents and soggy papery decay. You picture cozy fireside scenes, but the real image was damp poverty. Stockings floating like tiny corpses and turkeys turned into wet pulp. The cleanup was harsher because frozen ground blocked drainage, so the flood's fingerprints lingered on roofs and on memory. Railway cancellations in severe winters turned holiday travel into ice prisons. Stranded passengers camped in carriages with dwindling food and children shivering until relief trains could arrive. Instead of reunited families and loud toasts, there were rationed biscuits and whispered consolations to keep panic from rippling. For some, the delay meant missing funerals or failing to receive vital medicine, turning a festive reunion into a slow-motion disaster where hope arrived by tinsel was supposed to make trees sparkle, but for centuries it was a stealthy killer coated in lead and other toxic metals. You expect a warm nostalgia, but many kids ingested shiny garlands or touched them constantly, getting a slow, invisible dose of neurotoxins that caused headaches, stomach pain, and worse in the long term. The decorations that were meant to bring joy sometimes traded it for hospital beds, and silent, merchant ships and fishing vessels often faced their deadliest storms in December, and crews forced to spend Christmas at sea sometimes never saw land again. A festive tale of stockings by the hearth becomes horrific when the other side is a man clutching a flotsam log while his mates fade in freezing water. Bodies recovered later told stories of desperate decks, snapped rigging, and families who lit candles hoping a silhouette on the horizon would be their. Some holidays were marred by intentional poisoning, most famously when jealous relatives used rich, spiced puddings to hide arsenic or other toxins. You assume family meals are safe, but vengeful hands and inheritance disputes turned dessert into murder weaponry in plain sight. The scene is grotesque. Polished silver, a clink of glasses, and then the slow collapse of a relative who trusted the pudding more than the feud. Hunger makes holidays cruel. When bread ran short in hard years, Christmas could become the spark for riots and looting. We like to picture charity scenes and goodwill, but sometimes shelves were bare and desperate people took what they needed by force. Those breadlines and broken storefronts are the underside of a celebration that assumed abundance, revealing the raw economic fractures. Epidemics didn't pause for holiday hymns. In multiple centuries, Christmas gatherings ignited outbreaks, turning festive parishes into quarantine wards. You imagine joyful communion, but those same crowded services and communal meals were perfect transmission zones for fevers and coughs, and makeshift wards filled fast. Families who tried to keep tradition often watched as visiting relatives fell ill, transforming the holiday into an anxious vigil rather than the glamour of candlelit trees had a dark flip side, real flames and homes burning down in minutes. People picture cozy candlelight, but open flames near dry needles turned a festive center into a perfect accelerant. The horror was sudden. Crackling needles, curtains catching, and families evacuating with nothing but pajamas, making the next day a tangle of insurance claims. Plane crashes in winter have an added cruelty because survivors, if any, face brutal exposure. When flights failed on Christmas, rescue crews battled both weather and the holiday expectation that everyone would make it home. Instead of reuniting families, there were missing persons lists and tear-stained holiday cards that became memorials. The way the wreckage mingled with torn gift wrap created a visual shorthand for lost joy and abrupt. Attacks during religious services are especially jarring because the sanctuary is supposed to be sacred. On some Christmases, violence intruded into chapels and mass services, turning prayers into screams. The contrast between hymns and horror is sharp. Candlelight, the smell of incense, then sudden chaos as people scramble to protect children or pull the injured out into an earthquake on December 25th turns every tree and decoration into potential projectiles, collapsing roofs over dinner tables where families sat moments before. The jarring part is how quickly warmth and celebration become survival, with people digging loved ones from cold dust and hauling them to makeshift shelters. The hasty transformation from holiday cheer to rescue operation. There's a famous romantic image of the WWI Christmas truce, but the truth is complicated and sometimes tragic. Ceasefires were fragile and led to confusing moments of fraternization, followed by deadly miscommunications and even friendly fire later. You want a heartwarming pause, but for some the brief peace led to stricter reprisals and patrols after the truce ended. The memory is bittersweet. Soldiers sharing rations one night and trade stampedes at crowded holiday markets are a horrifying collision of expectation and scarcity. A rumor or a jammed exit turns jolly crowds into a crushing machine. You picture cheerful shoppers, but the result can be trampling, broken limbs, and deadly compressions in minutes. The aftermath leaves not just injuries, but the terrifying knowledge that a holiday mood can flip into a collective panic with droughts in winter create a cruel irony. There's no sleet, no cozy wet snow, just brittle landscapes and failed crops that mean empty plates come the holidays. Imagine a Christmas feast reduced to dust because the year's harvest withered, a different kind of bleak than most expect. The holiday decorations look particularly absurd when wreaths crack and candles smolder in dry air, turning seasonal cheer into a brittle facade over real deprivation. Why all these disasters around December? Christmas concentrates travel, meals, and public gatherings into a tight, stressful window where weather, scarcity, and human error pile up like bad tinsel. You romanticize perfect reunions, but high demand strains infrastructure, and the cold amplifies small problems into life-or-death situations. This bridge explains how seasonal pressure turns ordinary risks into holiday tragedies, and why history is so. Some shipwrecks dragged survivors into moral darkness, where cannibalism surfaced as grim survival strategy, and a Christmas stranded at sea could turn people into monsters of necessity. You imagine Santa bringing food, but shipwrecked crews sometimes sacrifice the dead to keep the living breathing, an act that haunts journals and courtrooms. These stories linger because they force us to confront what people choose when the social contract dissolves, and the 1914 truce is heartwarming in hindsight but unnerving up close. Enemies patting each other's backs in the same stretch where they'll later resume killing. The truce revealed how ordinary those men still were, craving camaraderie, yet the relief was temporary, and, for many, ultimately betrayed by renewed orders. That Christmas shows how fragile humanity can be under military command, a beautiful moment that couldn't survive the larger machine. Victorian charity events showcased orphans like trophies for rich donors, with children paraded in stiff new clothes for photo opportunities, and then sent back to misery. You think donations mean instant relief, but many of these displays were performative, smoothing conscience more than changing lives. The disturbing part is how holiday generosity became spectacle, commodifying suffering into heart-tugging entertainment for the well-off. In some regimes, Christmas was a moment of state theater while people quietly starved. Soviet winter holidays were often accompanied by shortages and political repression. You'd expect communal cheer, but millions faced ration points and fear, and the state's attempt to rewrite holidays made the season a cynical display. The tension between propaganda and hunger gives those Christmases a sinister, staged quality that scarred entire generations. When epidemics and disasters piled up, some Christmas seasons ended with mass burials under cold torchlight. Clergy and townsfolk worked double shifts to bury the dead before frost hardened the ground. The festive songs became muffled behind the earth-moving, turning parlor visits into mourners' watches. That bleak rush to intern the dead in December leaves an indelible image of a holiday house. Panics about evil Santas began as hoaxes and moral panics, but led to arrests, false accusations, and ruined careers for people in costumes. The fear that someone in red was a threat turned a harmless icon into a sudden symbol of danger, with police called to stores and malls over suspicious Santas. The phenomenon shows how easily festive symbols can be weaponized by rumor, and how public fear can criminalize. Although not all events occurred exactly on December 25th, the Donner Party's ordeal overlapped the holiday season and took on grotesque resonance because of the cannibalism that followed. Families hoping for home and hearth instead fought frostbite and hunger, and some resorted to eating the dead when all else failed. The horror is amplified by the season. When the world outside sings of togetherness, these travelers encountered an unthinkable, desperate inversion. The 1918 flu didn't respect carolers or clergy, and December surges meant funeral homes overflowing right through the holidays. You expect candles and quiet dinners, but families instead grabbed masks, isolated the ill, and watched clergymen run out of coffins. The pandemic's December peaks made the usual warmth of the season synonymous with anxiety and loss, and countless holiday cards were never sent because their senders never returned. Authoritarian regimes sometimes used holidays as cover for purges and deportations because the world is distracted and fewer observers are watching. You look for parades and charity drives, but some governments chose December nights to round up dissidents and ship them away. The juxtaposition of garlands and forced marches creates a visual that's hard to forget. Festive light above the backs of prisoners heading into long darkness. Pioneering families celebrated Christmas on the frontier with resourcefulness and faith, but sometimes winter killed the colony's spirit instead of nurturing it. You expect log cabins and robust mirth, but isolation meant no doctors, no resupply, and a blizzard could turn a small community into a frozen cemetery. The romantic narrative of rugged cheer often hides the hard truth. Survival was the holiday's main event, not joy. Arson attacks on churches in December hit hardest because the building is full and the symbolism is maximal. Burning a house of worship on Christmas is a cruelty designed to fracture community morale. You imagine sanctuary and singing, but arson turns that trust into ash and embers across the sky. The psychological damage ripples longer than the physical repair, because a burned church is not just a structure, but public celebrations like parades are meant to be communal pleasures, but their openness also makes them targets for attackers who want maximum impact. A Christmas parade attack turns families and candy canes into a horrifying tableau of escape and shock. Beyond immediate carnage, there's a cultural wound. These events used to be safe rituals, and after such incidents, people carry the memory of glitter. Some fringe groups co-opted Christmas symbolism for darker rituals, using midnight gatherings to perform sacrifices or psychodramas dressed as tradition. We think of wreaths and warmth, but in secretive pockets the holiday provided cover and a seasonal narrative to justify bizarre ceremonies. The scarier narrative is how quickly familiar icons can be perverted by ideology into something poisonous. The commercialization of Christmas has turned malls into pressure cookers where tempers flare and crowds crush, producing fights, injuries, and sometimes fatalities in stampedes. Instead of peaceful giving, the season's consumption spikes create real-world hazards when supply is low and desire is high. Security footage from these events reads like a cautionary tale about scarcity-driven violence masked. Some historic traditions disguised cruelty under the veneer of celebration, from punitive disciplinary rituals to forced humiliation of certain members during Christmas pageants. You expect wholesome rites, but families and communities sometimes use the holiday to enforce control and shame dissenters. The long-term damage of those practices often outlived the decorations, creating generational scars tied to what should have been sacred time for love. We've walked through fires, floods, famines, and perversions of tradition to see a less comfortable Christmas. One where holiday trimmings collide with human failure and natural disaster. The common thread is concentration, people, travel, and expectation packed into one fragile day that magnifies risk. Remember that the holidays can be both wonder and hazard. Honoring that complexity helps us prepare, protect each other, and perhaps keep history's darkest Christmases teach us that the season's magic is delicate and can be commandeered by weather, politics, greed, or human cruelty. But they also show the resilience of people who keep going. If these stories made you shiver or think twice about glitter and gifts, that's the point. Awareness is the first defense. If this ruined your appetite,